Hey there, spacers. This is Rick Tomlinson. Welcome back to the Space Revolution here on iRock Space Radio. As you know, we're part of the iHeart Radio Network and thrilled to be so. Our guest today is an amazing lady named Lee Steinke. And Lee is one of these people who maybe hasn't necessarily been a part of what I would call the space revolution for over the last years, but one of those kind of people who shows up as this kind of transformation begins to get, as some people might say, serious. The kind of person who is drawn into the challenges that we're facing and brings with her a lot of knowledge. Lee's background is pretty serious and pretty deep. She's got an MBA from Wharton. We know about those Wharton people. Uh, master's degree from Yale and University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Very impressive stuff. I've known Lee a little while, about a year or so now, I guess, and been very impressed by her credentials, and her ability to do what I would call dance with and dance. I've seen her dance as well, and she does that well. But I mean, as far as dancing with what it is we are all about and the people she interacts with, and it's very impressive. She is also this chief operating officer of Cislunar Industries. And so, what we're going to do, Lee, is we're going to start with that part, right? If you can tell me a little bit about Cislunar Industries, what the goal of the company is, what your plans are, and where you are now with it. So, and by the way, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rick. It's great to be on the show. And hi, everybody. Glad to be here. Cislunar Industries is a company that's developing metal processing capabilities for in space applications. So we sort of forge a critical missing link in the value chain of metal in space. So there's already a lot of metal up there that can be processed into useful materials to build large structures, to generate thrust in metal propellant thrusters, and create opportunities for growth of infrastructure throughout space.
And where is Cislunar located?
We are in Colorado, so we have a garage lab in Fort Collins, and we've got an office in Orbit Fab's building. So we are one of the Tycho station, taikonauts in
Mm-hmm.
the building that Orbit Fab hosts.
Yeah, and Orbit Fab, again, for those of you who've been listening before, is Dan Faber, gas stations and space guy. And what he did was put together a facility for lots of companies to kind of come together and work under one roof, which is a great model. So when you say that you're focusing on the processing, so that's not prospecting, that's not harvesting, or
Right.
is it, you're later in the chain,
Yeah. So we
basically.
don't do sourcing, we don't do transportation, logistics, and we don't do real estate. We're focused on our modular space foundry technology and the various subsystems that go with that. But we'll take metal on space stations, waste metal on space stations from experiments that do not need to be downmassed. We'll take space debris cut up by our partners and transported by our partners. We'll take lunar regolith on site, either pre-processed or unprocessed, and provide then the raw materials like sheet metal, rods, tubes, wire for 3D printing. So we're looking to be kind of the Carnegies of the space world.
So how far along are you guys right now,
Yeah.
in
So
terms of being a company?
we've been a U.S. company since 2019, and we've been milestoning away for the past couple years. We've raised um, almost $2 million in both dilutive and non-dilutive funding, and we've had two NASA contracts. The second of which included a mission on a parabolic flight. So we've advanced some of our technology to TRL-6, and I'm not sure how space savvy your audience is, but that's a measure of how ready our technology is for space. So that's an exciting milestone for us.
Mm.
We just got some additional good news that I can't share yet today, but if you go to our website, maybe in a month or so, you'll see some new good news. And one of the things that I really like about Cislunar is that we've thought about how to apply our technologies to different arenas. And we stick with that core competency of the foundry and its various subsystems. But those subsystems have applications in both terrestrial and in space applications that have sooner markets than the one, than full cycle metal processing in space. So we have that runway, we have a way to survive the runway and really get what we want to do done.
Oh, it's great. So, a couple of quick things I want to,
Yeah.
because there's a lot what you just said. So, for those of you who don't know what TRL is, that's Technical Readiness Level, and that was invented by our friend John Mankins. It's a
The
scale of one
evil
to
Dr.
nine.
Mankins.
Dr. John Mankins to whoever. I call him John. But anyway, we call each other other names, but we won't go there. And so the TRL basically breaks down into three areas. One is 1 through 3 roughly means that it's theoretical, it's being talked about, you're on the edge of doing something about it. 3 through 6 means you're lab testing it, you're working on it, etc. And then 6 through 9 means you're starting to apply it, fly it on space flights. And actually, when you hit 9, next step is you're going with it. You're going into the market with it. So that's just an explanation there. Um, so you guys, you're getting started now. You're talking about two different things here, and I want to get clarified with you on that. And that is the processing of metals in zero G, micro
Yeah.
G as we call it, free space itself. And then you were talking about lunar. Are you talking about doing it within the gravity of the moon? Because those are two very different kinds of things, and one of them for the listeners, and one of them you've got the stuff that's just floating all over the place, and you got little bits of metal or whatever you're trying to get it to go to a certain place and have certain things done to it, and then have it come out the other end and all of that. Or on the moon, at least you have a little bit of gravity that kind of makes it behave, let's say, a little bit
Yeah.
better. Um, are you guys working on both or just one?
Yeah, both. So terrestrial, as you say, terrestrial foundry operations rely heavily on gravity. Everything is pouring of molten metal. And so for our in space or in orbit applications, one of our expertises is in electromagnetics and electronics. And we have some real differentiation there in our team. And so we are developing the ability to manipulate the motion of molten metal using magnetic coils that uh, we can reverse or the polarity on and manipulate where the molten metal moves. And we can make it rotate and spin into a ball, which we think we can then advance using that technology. So it's um, an exciting part of what we're doing. That's one of the things that we tested on our parabolic flight that I mentioned. And so that's really important for anything that happens on orbit until we have rotating space stations. And then we'll go back maybe to the normal way.
Right.
Now, on the moon, we do plan to utilize the gravity there, but that hasn't been the focus of any of our current projects. So that's our longer term development plan. But it's kind of a reining in. It's an easier task in some ways than what we're trying to do in Leo.
Got it. Well, I think that I mean I'm fascinated by the topic, and part of the reason is as you know, some of the listeners know I was focused on asteroid mining for a while, and
Yeah, yeah,
but even previous to that, when I was running the Fines Endowment, we gave Dr. John Lewis, who's the god of asteroid knowledge, $500,000 to focus on the processing of ferrous metals
yep,
in a microgravity environment. And so it's an area that I'm a little bit familiar with, played around with a little bit. Um, but I love that that you guys are pushing forward in it in such a strong way. It occurs to me, by the way, I mean, if you're talking about being able to manipulate something into a sphere in microgravity, then we're talking about ball bearings.
Yes.
Um, and anybody who's followed the space field or read some of the books about space and um, the talk about the third industrial, the industrial revolution and high frontier things like that. The idea there is that perfect ball bearings are like a big deal. And if you can create perfect spheres in space, and Lee, something just popped into my head. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay. Um, the thing that just popped into my head is, watching I was watching the 60 Minutes thing on the fusion breakthrough that was just
Yes.
had, and it reminded me of the idea of the fact that when they're doing the fusion, part of the thing is that they have to have a perfectly spherical ball that they
Yeah.
aim at. I You're probably already thinking
Mm.
about it. I would say go there too.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have there's some other operators in this space, and we've kind of differentiated ourselves as the um, gritty, we'll take anything, we'll turn it into something real kind of thing. Where some of our competitors are more on the boutique. We're going to make one fancy thing that's really expensive and sell it to the government and on
Yeah.
Earth, and we're going to use it on Earth. But when it comes to the expertise that we have in manipulating molten metal, that could be a place where we actually would want to compete in that market of a boutique product. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and the fact that it's so small, the funny part on the 60 Minutes thing, is the sphere is so small that then when they glue it to the little thing that all the lasers are shooting at, to create the fusion, they use a human hair to put the drop of glue on. That's how tiny we're talking, right? So, um, and we like small right now, until we have a starship or something. Small is
Yeah.
good. So something to think about.
Huh.
It sounds like you guys are on to something. Projecting forward, what do you think are the next big milestones? You were talking milestones for Cislunar.
Yeah, so like I talked about initially, the application of some of our subsystems terrestrially. So we're looking at in mine applications for processing metal. So if mines terrestrially can process metal ore into ingots within the mine, remotely, so that there aren't a lot of people, that you don't need a lot of extra space, and just take the ingots out with whatever minimal material needs to come out to make the space for the robotics and the technology to go in. You can save probably 95% of your mine decommissioning costs. There is the same, if we can accomplish that, then we have the same applications in decommissioning of nuclear technology, whether submarines or nuclear power plants. Those are very expensive to decommission and often require transportation over long distances and national borders in order to clean those up and get them taken care of. But if we can go in without human intervention and melt down the rods, the casings, that's another application. So we're looking at those. We also have our expertise in electromagnetics and electronics. And we're looking at current markets for power propulsion units, switches, and capacitors that we believe we've got some differentiation on from what's out in the market today.
Wow, and I love the fact again. I'm wearing. You can't see it on the podcast, but I'm wearing my Space Fund Evil Venture Capitalist hat as we're speaking, and that's what we always like to hear is near-term markets on the Earth that allow you to then leverage yourself out onto the frontier. Um, Sounds very fascinating. And we're going to wrap up this section with that. We're going to come back and start talking about some other things in just a few moments. So, gang, you're listening to iRock Space Radio here on the iHeartRadio Network. My name is Rick Tumlinson, and our guest is Lee Steinke from Cislunar Industries. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, Spacers. This is the Space Revolution. I'm your host, Rick Tumlinson. We have an amazing guest today, Lee Steinke with Cislunar Industries. Now, one of the interesting things about you, Lee, is you've kind of rolled in, as I was saying at the beginning, you kind of rolled into this field, well, sort of like a tornado rolls across Kansas. But I mean, you're coming in here. All of a sudden, everywhere I'm going, there's Lee. Lee's doing this, and Lee's part of that. We're bringing Lee in here, etc. And what I
You
like
can't get
about
rid of
that,
me.
yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I've had the same problem, but you're much more fun than I am. And the thing is that you're bringing a level of expertise. You came from the oil industry or the oil and
Yeah.
gas industry, I gather. Um, as you're rolling into the space field, now knowing that this is newer and that's a 150-year-old industry. Other than that, what do you see in terms of similarities and differences that have just jumped out at you?
Yeah, so part of the reason that I picked the space industry was that it was one of the only other places other than oil and gas, which I think is on the decline, macro decline, even with these little blips that we have of excitement, um, is that you get in the same company, you get to do both the R&D and the execution. A
Mm.
lot of industries aren't like that. They do R&D, in some other division far away. They do, universities or national labs are doing, renewable energy labs are inventing new things, and then the companies adopt them or license them and do the field work to execute on them. I really like both sides of that coin, and I wanted to be upstream and downstream at the same time, on that kind of thing. And so space really attracted me for that reason, because it's technical, and because it's geopolitical. I think you can do things. There's an opportunity to influence global matters in a positive way in both industries. I mean, if oil and gas had built more natural gas export facilities in the 2010s, um, into the 15s, we would have not Russia wouldn't have been in a position that it was in. So, I think there's opportunity to get ahead of things using space, and I want to be part of that as well.
Mm. Any anything that's like dramatically different that you've run into?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, with the exception of the obvious primes, I think the biggest difference is that oil and gas people have deployed capital and taken action over and over and over and over and over and over again. And they learn from that. They get feedback. What did I do badly? What did I do well? Some careers in space, you only get one or two missions, right? They're long wait times, long missions. You get less instantaneous feedback. You get less, fewer slaps in the face of your mistakes, especially with the standards of NASA missions being so high and the low likelihood of failure on those. You're not getting that benefit of having failed and learned from it over and over again. So I see when I first came in, I encountered what I thought was sort of more idealism in the space industry, which is nice in a way. But it's also an opportunity to help share what I've learned about how, when you do big things, many times you get some experience in resiliency that I'd like to see the space industry benefit from.
Yeah, that's sort of I made up a word a long time ago called new space, and it's kind of that, right? It's the difference,
Yes,
fail
yes.
quickly, move along, learn, blow things up,
Yes.
break things, fix them, and do it again, and hopefully blow them up less often. Um, and safely, of course, safely.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's. I think you're right. I mean, it is so sad sometimes when you look at the time between ideation and execution. That some people's entire career is wrapped up around one mission. Now that's understandable if you're like your mission happens to be, like Galileo or something, sending a
Yeah. New
probe,
horizons. And
yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
going way out there. It's going to take years until we get the whole light speed of light thing going. But a lot of times in our field, that's because of the legacy. That's because of the bureaucracy. That's because of having to deal with congressional funding and on and on and on. It's a bit maddening, and
Yeah.
we're working on it. A lot of people are working to change that, and glad to have you aboard to help us change that with your lessons. What um, what drew you in towards, again, you kind of touched on it, but what drew you in towards space again? What was there, like a moment where you said, I'm done with these holes in the ground, I'm going to go, I'm going up.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed the images from 67P. That's a European Space Agency mission to a comet. And I don't know what, 10 years ago, maybe 12 years
Mhm.
ago. I had not at that point joined Twitter, but I joined Twitter just so I would be quick to see those photos that were coming in. And it was such a magical place. I've always enjoyed the stars. I considered doing plate tectonics on Venus for my master's degree, elected not to, and thank goodness because now they've shown that Venus doesn't have formal plate tectonics. So I'm glad I didn't build a career off of that. But lots of little things. But those images from 67P were really exciting to me, um, and magical. And so when I got to a position where I could really jump into something new and fresh, space came to the top of the list.
Hmm. And so how did you execute that? How did you make that
Mm,
change, like from, you know gas industry?
yeah.
What did you do? Just like call up somebody, hey, I want to do some space, or what did you do?
I I kind of did. Yeah. So I have a friend named Kate Palmer. She's a banker. And so I was having coffee with her in just as we were exiting from lockdown, we went outdoors to a coffee shop and caught up a little bit. And I told her, "Hey, you know what? I think I'm interested in space. What do you got for me? Who do you know?" I didn't know a soul, like
Hmm.
zero, nobody. And she was like, "Oh, I know this lady. I'll introduce you." So she introduced me to none other than Shelley Brunswick, who
Oh,
knows
okay.
everybody, right? So I started following Shelley to her virtual speaking uh, engagements. And I would make a friend in the chat of each of these speaking engagements. And that's how I met Joe Rice at Lockheed Martin. That's how I met Tim Chrisman at Foundation for the Future. I just sort of met everybody that way. And then I started volunteering for both Space Foundation, where Shelley is, and for Foundation for the Future, where Tim Chrisman is. And um, I've I've always advised people not to take less than their worth, and all this. And here I am volunteering for free, but it was a wonderful thing to do. And eventually, both organizations hired me. And really, the way that I broke in seriously was through the interviewing that I did on screen for Foundation for the Future, and then building networks for activities with Space Foundation. You get to meet, you get to call whoever you want, and important people will take your calls. Even if they don't know who you are, they want to talk. They're interested in spreading whatever message they have. And so I had very good response. People just willing to talk and be interviewed. And it was like an instant master's degree having to interview all these CEOs and generals and people who know what's going on in the industry. It was great.
Yeah, it's funny because I kind of started a little bit the same way, in a way, and that
Yeah.
is that I came in doing media,
Yeah.
and interviewing people and then helping people produce videos and stuff like that because I didn't know my way in because I
Yeah,
was such a
yeah.
terrible student that unlike you, I did not have Wharton, Yale, and University of North Carolina.
But you had aircraft carrier, and that's pretty good.
Well, we had an aircraft carrier at one point for the New York City L5 Society back in the day. Um, but you know, the difference, I think, one of the differences in our field over almost every, there's probably one or two others out there, but it's not just an industry; it's a cause.
Hmm.
And so, if you pay attention to people in the field, they're excited that you want to know,
Yeah,
right? And because then you can join the cause. And I include the aerospace people. I give them a hard time, but there are a lot of
yeah.
we're all dreamers. We're going at it different ways. But it's a validation. It's an inclusion exercise. It's sharing of enthusiasm. It's like, come on in. We need you. Come on, let's go. And that's very different than most established industries in the world. It's like I don't know if you're working on feed products for livestock. That's not really a cause. I guess maybe it
Well,
is.
in
There's
some
probably
ways, in some
somebody.
ways it is.
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm
It,
sure. I don't mean to insult anybody, but go ahead.
yeah, I think you're right about that. I was very surprised how much a community it was and how quickly, I went to my first space symposium about what, 6 months after I started doing what I just described. And I walked across the campus at the Broadmoor. And it was like, "Oh, hi, I've interviewed you. Oh, hi, I know you. Hey, what's going on?" And it was amazing how many people I knew in that place in such a short time. And I never was good at networking. I never was trained in how to interview people. I didn't know anything. And I just got out there and tried something and it was great. So, doing things that are out of your comfort zone is a big deal when you're transitioning industries. And you just got to be ready to take whatever.
Yeah, I'm a little crushed right now because when I walk across that same campus, they turn and walk away as if they're suddenly, or they pick up their phone and start talking, even though there's nobody on the.
Hey,
I don't
Rick,
know.
we
Maybe
go
it's
use you
just
later.
you're kind of a nice person, and then there's me. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I agree with you totally. So you've gotten in the field now. You're doing this outside of Cislunar. Are there projects you're working on that you're excited about?
Yeah, yeah. So I have gotten to work with Space Force through New Space New Mexico
Hmm.
on their long-term strategy. So I get to work on futures workshops. I'm part of um, a group that meets regularly to envision possible futures.
Hmm.
And then we've carried that exercise into a workshop that brought in industry perspectives on what commercial space will look like in the future, meaning what will Space Force have to defend in terms of lines of commerce in much the same way that the Navy defends lines of commerce on our seas. So that's been a wonderfully fascinating project for me. Again, I'm an entire newcomer, but just I get in there, try to learn as quickly as I can, get to the heart of the matter, and enough vocabulary to be conversant, and then just take it out and roll it out and get what I can for our national security. It's great.
No, that's true. It's really great. Um, I think, as you know, I'm also working on a different angle with Space Force on the
Yeah, you're on the
on
Doctrine Advisory Group, right?
yeah
Yeah,
doctrine organization group. We're called the Dog. I
dog. That's a
I
good name for you, Rick.
he Dr. Colucci wanted to call it the Dog. I don't know why. We're working on the
Okay.
capstone stuff, but yeah, we're coming at it different ways. We're
Yeah.
in the same groups, same circles. Um, and so you're working with that, and I do see you around at different events and things like that. And so you're rolling around in this field and creating. What I like about your approach to things is I think that you're a pragmatist,
Hmm.
right? You're
That's a
very
good
much
word.
about you know don't blow it at me. Just let's figure out how this thing works, right? Is that how you look at it?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah. No, no, I think you are, and I get that feeling from you and the discussions we've had too. But you're a nice pragmatist, right? You're just like people like you, and they like your advice about let's talk about these things seriously, and that's good. It's really good.
Yeah, it's an awkward transition. It's one of the things that I've thought about as I've made this career transition because I do make an impression of being inspirational right away. And sometimes when you transition from inspirational to gravitational, or practical or critical, even in some cases, that can be a difficult transition for people to absorb on the receiving end, right? And so, one of the reflections that I've had on myself in terms of how to accomplish the most I can do in this career is to make sure I'm conscious of that and make those transitions mindfully, and with my audience, fully prepared for that shift. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's
Cool. Well, we're going to dive a little more into that and some other stuff here when we come back. So, spacers, you are listening to the Space Revolution. My name is Rick Tumlinson. Our guest is Lee Steinke from Cislunar Industries, and we are part of the the iHeart Radio Network. We are on the iRock Radio channel. Um, we're going to be back in a couple of minutes and have some more fun with Lee. All right, Spacers, back to the show, the Space Revolution, with our guest Lee Steinke. My name is Rick Tumlinson, and thank you for listening. As you've been hearing, Lee is a very dynamic personality, and as we were just saying, a pragmatist. I like your comment right at the end there of the last segment where you were saying because you can jar people. People like to
Mhm.
put you into a slot.
Yeah.
Um, I'm probably the textbook definition of someone who isn't in a slot. And my friend Jeff Manber, who is part of Voyager Space Systems NanoRacks, he's a legend in the field from New York. And forgive me for doing his voice, but he's like, Rick, what are you? You're a writer, you're a speaker, you got an entrepreneur. What are you going to be when you grow up? You're confusing me. Um, and it's funny because at one and the same time, we need specialists in our field, right? But in my vision of someone who can deal with the frontier, whether it is the frontier of this industry as we begin to break out to the real frontier, or once you're out there, the key, especially for those who are rising up to leadership positions or going to be integral in terms of the structure of what it is we're doing, is a dynamism and an ability to adapt and do all kinds of things. It's the way your mind works, not the specific thing you're doing with your mind all the time. Robert Heinlein, the great science fiction writer, um, in the book Time Enough for Love, there's a little section in the middle of it, I think. And he talks about all the different skills someone who goes out into space should have. You need to be able to
Yeah.
change a diaper, sew a quilt, shoot a gun, da 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 da. You need to be able to do all these things. You strike me as one of those kind of people. You made the mistake of like telling me at one point that you had um, done professional ballet or theatrical
Dance,
dancing
professional
or
dance. Yeah, yeah.
professional dance. You've got these other skills. There's probably three or four that I have no idea about. Um, but that's great. And the reason I'm highlighting that is because I want those listeners out there who maybe aren't locked in, like I am an
Hmm.
engineer. This is all I do.
Yeah.
There may be people out there who are like you and I, who have different interests. They come from different fields. They come from different areas, but we want them. We want
Yeah.
them to come in. What are your thoughts on that? I've been going on, but what are
Yeah,
your
yeah.
thoughts?
It's a great question, and I've thought about it quite a bit. I'm a geophysicist as well, and so I do have a field that falls within the astronaut category. Geologists and geophysicists can be astronauts, um, but it's a it's not what I used really to initially get in the industry. I want to be a technical leader. Want to be driving projects, very good at that sort of thing, leading teams of people much more expert than I in technical fields, but I can keep them aligned with business goals and drive things forward that way. That being said, I have been fascinated by how valuable my generalist skills
Hmm.
have become almost immediately in this industry. Um, I think that our world is moving towards specialism, and that so many are pigeonholed in smaller and smaller specialties, whether it's at a university or at a company or in the government. There's all kinds of opportunities to get pigeonholed and specialized. And I would encourage people to get the depth that they need in their field of specialization, but don't forget to talk to people about other things and see those connections. Look for what is similar about your specialty to somebody else's, because the opportunities for technology transfer. I talked to a group recently that was, they were doing a patent search to determine if there was any available technology for what they were trying to accomplish, and it was a space technology. And I asked, "Oh, well, how broad is your patent search?" And they said, "Oh, we're looking at all the space patents." And I said, "Really? Are you like, you don't think people have had to do this in mining, in oil and gas, in, aerospace, on the aeronautics? You don't think people have had to do this in, maybe even construction, large scale construction? Why would you limit your patent search to space where there's been so little investment? I mean, it feels big, but really there's been so little investment in space over the years. And there's opportunity if you look across the aisle, if you sniff out what people are doing, even if it's at the bar. Just you're out at church, or you're at wherever you go, who knows, you're at the barn or with your horse. Whatever you do, chat with people about what they're thinking about, and you will find connections that are valuable and will move you forward.
Yeah, I think that your point's really important there, and that there's this idea that NASA spins off, let's say our space program spins off
Yeah.
all kinds of technologies. Well, it does, but it also spins in
Yes.
technologies. And a lot of I'll give you an example. It's on the pad a few hundred miles from here, Starship, Elon Musk Starship, right? So this is, don't pin me down if you're a freaking engineer, okay? But I'm just gonna. It's a vague story. I just want to make a point
Yeah,
here.
we're,
Um,
we're just chatting, Rick. There are no wrong answers, babe.
there are no wrong answers, but seriously, like Elon's original designs that his team had come up with, um, the early vehicles, and you'll recall them, they were like white and black, and they looked like space shuttle kind of things, and that's
Yeah,
because they had tiles on them
yeah,
and all of these standard things that you would need if you're coming in doing a belly flop through the atmosphere and you're dealing with a super dense, sort of plasma and high temperatures and things like that.
yeah.
Um, and one of the challenges that they found was that um, in between flights, because there's so much temperature changing that's going on, it wasn't had to do with the tiles, but the glue that would hold the
Yes.
tiles in was a real problem, right? And so you're having to rebuild the sucker.
Yeah.
So what does he do? Well, he goes out and he looks around. And he goes, you know what? I'm just going to make it out of steel, old fashioned steel, right? And yeah, it's a lot heavier, all that kind of stuff. But that's a technology that we've been working with for 500 years, 600 years
Yeah.
easily.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's why the vehicle is silver now,
Yeah.
right? And so that's a spin in. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, and that's really interesting because one of the things I learned recently at a meeting in London is that some of the key suppliers of thermal technology for spacecraft don't want to be in that business anymore. So apparently, it's either too low margin or not profitable at all. There are only a couple of key providers, and they don't want to do it anymore. And so finding those other ways to do it that are cheaper and better, maybe best for everybody. I think it's exciting when people use that. Cislunar Industries, when we think about processing material on the moon, we have to look back 100 years, 150 years, maybe longer, at how people processed metal before there was the modern beneficiation, because modern beneficiation uses materials that aren't available on the moon and are too volume, too much volume and too heavy to take with us if we can possibly help it. So looking back at those heavy industry activities before the final version that we use today is going to be
Hmm.
valuable in all kinds of ways. It's really smart.
Yeah, it takes you way back. Beneficiation, by the way, is differentiating between different kinds of substances. This is actually where you're using gravity. Um,
Yes. Well,
but
if we have it, yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry. Just we have people that are focused in different areas, and we're unlike you, they're not all smart in all the different areas like me. I have to get some explanations now and then. So anyway, look, I'm fascinated by this idea of the dealing with the metals and things like that. Um, kind of swinging back around to that to the cislunar industries angle. Um, One of the concerns I'm dealing with my Earthlight, our nonprofit here, is we're going to be looking at supporting the work on orbital debris, and
Yes.
that's on the top of a lot of people's minds, inside and outside of the space field. Do you really think that that's a place where cislunar could play, like chewing up old spacecraft and
Yeah. Yeah. So
reusing it, right?
our first in space revenue in 2025 will be on a space station where we take metals that would otherwise be downmassed at high cost and process them into wire filament for 3D printing. But
Now let me
much
hang
of
on.
our,
I just want to give an explanation for that.
yes,
Okay.
okay,
So, one of the interesting things about the space station is whenever one of the ships goes up and down, a lot of times they're just bringing trash down, garbage down from the space station, and that costs. So, what you're talking about is like, I don't know, maybe they peel the foil off of their cheeseburger meal or something that day, and they've got this
yeah,
piece of
yeah, yeah.
aluminum foil, right?
It's mostly like the casings on the aluminum boxes that the experiments go up and
Ah,
down in.
okay.
So, they're there's a box to hold the spiders that are, they're studying how the orb weavers make webs in microgravity, right? And that box has an aluminum casing. It gets downmasked now all the way safely to Earth, when in fact, really, they just want the spiders and the glass box. But they just put it all in one and send it down. And it costs twice as much to send it down as to send it up.
Yeah.
And so we have that opportunity to save money for our clients through that kind of process. But I wanted to throw that out there. But our main use case originally, as the company was being formed, was to recycle space debris. And so we have a variety of partners in that value stream. We, partner with companies who are capturing space debris. You talked about nanoracks cutting space debris. That's one of the things that we've looked at with them. They're a partner on one of our NASA grants. And so all these companies that want to handle space debris, we actually close the business loop for them, because otherwise it's just regulatory drivers, right? The government has to pay to clean up a Superfund
Mhm.
site, right? But if we can take those materials and turn them into propellant and into construction materials, then it changes the game, because then you can have a customer on the downstream side who actually buy products that are useful in space.
I love it. My problem when I talk to folks like you is it just like 10 things go off in my head while you're talking. And we'll have to talk offline about the up orbiting of debris, future junkyards in
Yeah.
space,
Yeah.
um, rights of
Yeah,
salvage.
we just initiated our salvage service concept, and yeah, it's there's demand now that that 5-year rule is in place where people have after their satellite retires, it can't float around for more than 5 years anymore, at least if it's a U.S. asset. And so there will be customers who need a place to house their asset if they don't want to completely just, have it disintegrate in the atmosphere. If they want to preserve it for possible later use, repurpose it, then we may have a place where they can store it.
Right. We're going to have to deal with a lot of. I was talking to my friend Aaron Osterly from the Space Frontier Foundation, and
Yeah.
was a policy wonk,
Yep.
and we're going to have to deal with a lot there because they're thinking old school about bringing things
Hmm.
down. They actually put words like that in the language. We have to get rid of those words, so you're not mandated to deorbit. It just needs to be reutilized, or
Yes.
up orbited or taken out of, you know, we just don't want it hitting, Clooney or Sandra Bullock. That's the key thing. We got to protect them. Um, so we're going to come back in a minute. We're going to talk about a few more things here in our last section, but this is fascinating. I'm enjoying the conversation. Um, Spacers. That's my spacers voice. Spacers. You are listening to the Space Revolution. My name is Rick Tumlinson, and we're on IROC Space Radio. We're part of the iHeartRadio network. We're with Lee Steinke, and we're going to be back in a minute. All right, my spacer or space cadet friends. We are back with the Space Revolution. My name is Rick Tumlinson. This is a iRock Space Radio. You may be listening to this as a podcast, by the way, and that's one reason I refer to it. I think I made this up. Somebody else probably did, as most of the things I come up with, somebody else made up. I call it a radio pod. So you would be either heard this live on the radio or you're listening to a podcast now. But what's most important is the content of that pod. Um, and that is Lee Steinke, who is our guest tonight from Cis Lunar Industries. As I said earlier, she's CEO, COO of Cis Lunar, and we're having a great conversation back and forth on a lot of different things. So, Lee, you said you kind of just made a decision to go into space, right? And what was it? I mean, you saw the Comet mission. Was that really the only thing that just like you saw this Comet mission go, I want to get in space? Or was there something
No.
underlying it that was kind of already working on you?
Uh, I'm gonna I'm gonna tell you a personal story.
Oh, it's just you and I,
And
nobody else here. Go ahead.
yeah. So I used to read my children books, lots of books, still do sometimes. And The Gingerbread Man is sort of a silly story. It doesn't seem to have a point, but and it's old fashioned in its language and its cadence. But I read it anyway. I was like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But when my father died in 2019, I thought
Mm.
about it more, and for some reason that book kept coming to mind. And here's why: the wife is inside cooking the gingerbread man, and she's like, puts him out on the shelf, and he jumps up and runs away once he's cool, I guess. And the lady starts running after him. Stop, stop. I want to eat you. And he says, you can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. Run, run as fast as you can. Right. And then the husband is like, wait a minute. Don't run away. I want to eat you. Run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. And then there's a cow and a dog and a chicken and whoever else. And every time it's run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. And they all just want to eat him. But Foxy Loxy, he decided that he would eat him. And so he did. And I
Mhm.
used that story in my father's eulogy because he was a person who decided what he would do and then did it. And I wanted to be like him. And so I decided to come to space, and here I am.
Very nice. Very touching. And condolences on your father. I recently lost mine.
Thank you.
Um, that is, and I'm not going to plug Star Wars here. We have this discussion here about whether Star Wars is science fiction or, you know, myth. And
Yeah.
I think it is more myth, but this is right up the alley of don't try, Luke. Do,
Yes. Yes.
right. Just do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that. I like that. That's I first of all, I hadn't heard that story in so long that I was like, oh, what happens next?
Who would, right? Right.
Foxy Loxy. I forgot about Foxy Loxy. Um,
Foxy Loxy's the bomb.
yeah, so you've done it. You're out there, you're kicking it. You just did it. You just crossed over. Is that the lesson you would tell any young people or any women? You know, as
Hmm.
you know, you've come into the field, and we got too many boys in space. Um, you know, and boys like their toys and rockets and this and that and the other. But I mean, what would you say to a young woman who's out there who's interested in this field, or anybody,
Hmm.
as
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
how to get in? I mean, your model. I loved your model. I just want to say real quick. I loved your model talking to people. And we've said this on the show before. That's why I'm
Yeah.
bringing it up. Of
Yeah.
getting in there and just starting to talk to people. But go ahead, tell us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think regardless of who it is, the way that I've found success in a transition is by realizing that you are not in, you're not the expert anymore,
Mm-hmm.
but you're the expert in yourself. And you have to come in without apologizing for anything that you are or have to offer and anything that you don't have to offer. If you have to find those places and niches or whatever it is that need what you have. And space needs all kinds of things that are not stereotypical, not well understood. And by putting your own wares, out on the table, you know, put yourself out there and see who needs you and where you can apply those skills and be creative. And I would say the same thing to entrenched space people. Look on that table for things that you don't realize you need and get the people who know how to do those things and bring them in because the fundamentals of engineering are the same whether it's an aerospace engineer or a petroleum engineer or and the fundamentals of science are the same, the scientific method. The fundamentals of communications are the same, the fundamentals of finance are the same, and those underlying principles that make people capable of generalism carry across and provide opportunity across industries.
Perfect. And I agree. And the one thing you're not going to find on the first human missions to, let's say, I'll pick Mars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are specialists.
Hmm.
You're not going to be on the crew. You are not going to be on the crew because if you're sending a crew of 5 people to Mars, you need people that can do all kinds of different things. It's, later, it's a luxury to have specialists, right? That's
Yeah.
because they need care and feeding. There's some people, yeah, you just want to lock them in a room, slide a pizza under the door, and have them slide the information back out, right?
Yeah.
But that's a very good point you're making, and I like the fact that what you're saying is also telling the people in the field, you know, look around out there because we have a lot of niches. I can
Mm.
never say that word. We have a lot of
Me
those.
either.
Yeah. there's a lot of vacuum in space, and we need to fill it. Let's put it that way. Um, all right, so we have listeners around the world too. What would you say to them? What would you say to
Spacers.
people
We
outside of
call
the
them
U.S.?
spacers.
Say it again.
What
I'm
would I
sorry.
say? Oh, I was just imitating your voice. Spacers.
Spacers. Yeah,
Yeah.
but what would you say to them about getting involved too? I mean, somebody sitting in a developing nation right now that's listening to this, or a country that
Yeah.
isn't playing in space. What would you say to them?
Yeah, that one there was a panel at the Global Space Science Forum for ISESCO, which is the Islamic World Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And there was a panel there where they talked about this, and it stuck with me, that this is sort of the same thing. Play to your strengths. Luxembourg has made a place for themselves. UAE has made a place for themselves. But the Egyptian Space Agency is sort of finding their niche, whatever it is, as well. And by not trying to be NASA or Roscosmos, and just choosing an area where they can really make an impact, I think that's kind of the best way. Um,
Hmm.
International individuals, I think, have the same challenges that we have. They have to make a decision about whether they want to try to be a US based asset, so that they can be eligible for funding from the types of funding that are only available to US companies or US citizens. But really it's the same story. What do you bring to the table, and what do you want to do, and how can you communicate about what you bring to the table that will allow people to listen to you?
That's great. So, in our back and forth beforehand, I told you about some of the fun questions I ask.
Yay, I like fun
And
questions.
I was like, hey, what's your favorite science fiction? And I kind of gave you a little preview of that. And you said, well, I'm not really a big science fiction reader. So we'll skip past that one. And you kind of indicated, though, that you did like Star Wars as a movie, right?
You
So,
did, yes. Yeah, you
and
want me
yeah, tell me you said something about a Star Wars. I'm curious about this now. Tell me about this little story about
to?
Star Wars.
Well, I was a kid when Star Wars came out, and we watched the movie. It was my family, my whole family. We watched the movie, and I just desperately wanted to see it again. It was, so great and wonderful. And instead of leaving the theater, we just went out and we bought tickets again, and we went straight back in and we watched it immediately a second time. And it was a formative, even though Star Wars to me, fiction, I don't worry about the atmosphere. I just worry about character development, story, the challenges. So whether it's science fiction or historical fiction or whatever, I look for those things. But Star Wars is wonderful, and it was just such a good formative experience in sort of the things that I'm talking about doing. Seeing an opportunity and just taking it, and not worrying about whether it's weird or whether people will accept that. If you see an opportunity and you feel a desire to chase something, you just go ahead and do it. And there's no law against it, then take the bull by the horns and do
Right. Critically important point there. If there's no law against it, um,
it.
except some laws. But anyway,
Speaking of being
um,
the Carnegies of space.
yes, right, exactly. So you've entered the field. You've been around in it now, floated around, gotten to know some of the folks in it, um, and kind of maybe hopefully gotten a little of osmosis of some of the vision that we have and the dreams that we have in the future about it. What is your vision of what you'd like to see happen in space in the next 50 years?
Yeah. Oh, that's a tough one. So I've maybe two different things I want to say about that.
Of course.
First, in my 20 years in oil and gas, I went through multiple iterations of people saying, oh, we're going to automate this. We're going to put robots on this. We're going to have machinery that handles this without humans. We're going to have the capability. to think like humans and do what humans do. And I certainly believe that the progress on AI in the last couple of years has been game changing and will only accelerate. It's happening and it will happen. But having seen so many things not happen commercially, I still have a um, a leaning that humans are going to be needed. Humans are generalist brains in ways that right now are still highly competitive and could, even with the expense of sending humans to space, still be more economical than trying to get machines to do what humans can do better at this point. And so I do see human presence as a key to the success of space development. That being said, I am still a pragmatist about what we can do in space. And I think international competition is a key driver of real need. It's the ultimate high ground, and there's a real need to be there for our own national security, for the national security of our allies, and to continue to be a player in the way of life that we want to have. Um, I am not dreamy about what people will do in space. I'm not a romantic in that way. I have run into a lot of romantics that I care about in that way, but I am not that way. I think that people will bring their vices to space if they go. And I believe that we will have the same challenges there, and that, perhaps there will be foundational shifts in thinking, like the overview effect, but that won't change human nature, and it won't change human competitiveness, and it won't change the demand for natural resources. Um, so it's a challenge there, and I have lots to say about natural resources, maybe on another day.
Yeah, we are starting to run out of time, and my name is Rick, and I'll be your romantic tonight. I am. I agree with your pragmatic perspective. We can do our best to be
Yeah.
better. And one thing I've noticed is it may not seem that way, but every time we've moved into new realms, geographically or whatever, and it may not seem that way, and we can have longer conversations about that, but we are getting a little bit better and a little bit
Yeah.
better and a little bit better every time. So, um, otherwise, I'd be wrapping this up and off my way to the arena to watch gladiators chop each other to bits, right? We don't do that anymore. We do watch robots do it, but anyway. So, look, I want to thank you very much, Lee. It's been fun. You've been very patient, and I really appreciate you coming in. Um, people don't realize this, but I do very little prep as far as coaching people what to say and everything, and what it reveals and what it opens up is exactly what you've done, and I truly appreciate that, and I know the listeners do as well. So, thank
Thank
you
you so
very
much.
much.
It was
All
a
right, folks,
delight.
that's it for the Space Revolution. My name is Rick Tumlinson. You've been listening to us on iRock Space Radio and the iHeart Radio Network. We are going out the airlock.